Week 8, Thinking Out Loud, Lecture 2.4, Visualizing Sustainability Stories Through the Storyboard. What is the context for these lectures? Filmmakers have used storyboards for over a century to lay out the shots that the camera will capture, and storyboards are basically comic art. This lecture covers pre-visualization and the process of thinking out loud as we move toward thinking out louder, preparing for the most impactful representations of our imaginings, the bridge between static imagery and motion pictures or moving pictures. It sets the stage for the moment in history when moving pictures arrived to move us, and animation was discovered to ensoul inanimate objects, opening up deeper possibilities for communicating our imagined futures. I know. Somewhere in your educational journey, some well-intentioned teacher probably tried to discourage you from reading comic books. At least that's the way it was when I was a kid. Once you got to a certain age, you were told comic books were for kids. Some tried to tell us they would rot our brains. Serious scholars, we were told, could use the powers of their own imagination to magically transform tiny, linearly ordered black symbols in neat rows on white paper into elaborate, colorful, moving images and sounds, all in our own heads. Picture books were for children and laggards who needed crutches. And comic books, which gave a frame-by-frame account of all the visuals and action and details, down to the type of shirt and tie or cape and boots the protagonist wore, were downright dangerous to developing minds because they never gave us room for creativity and interpretation. Goodness gracious, if we allowed students to read comic books, what would come next? Animated movies? Live action movies? Such media, if they could ever evolve, would rob humanity of the ability to think for themselves. Pictures belong in an exhibition or museum. A few could be allowed on the living room wall to show status, especially if they were from famous artists. But they didn't belong in the medium that so perfectly separated man from the beasts. After all, no mere animal could read, even if dogs could be taught to dance or sing or even make sounds that seemed to function like a language when they tried to think out loud. And since our job as parents and educators was to take a wild child and educate them into full civilization, eventually we wanted to remove the training wheels, throw away the crutches, and prove their worth by the ability to use the brain alone to translate printed symbols which could carry the thoughts of the ancients across time and space into analog sounds and images and actions in today's world. Thus, much of the liberal arts education of the elites involved turning children into men of letters. Women, by the way, weren't supposed to reach those heights, and many members of the ruling class discouraged them from reading at all, while Negro slaves were routinely shot or lynched if they were caught reading a book. George Bernard Shaw, who wrote Man and Superman, also wrote the play Pygmalion, later turned into the musical My Fair Lady. It was about a linguist's attempt to turn a low-class Cockney woman into a fair lady, asking, why can't a woman be more like a man? The answer, of course, is because your patriarchy has done everything it can to prevent women from gaining power, which is the privilege of being a man. The elites insisted their children be taught to sight read on the piano, proving that they could take symbols on a sheet of music and turn these into the subtlest of finger movements like a machine, observing every legato and every dotted 16th note and arpeggio. Playing jazz by ear was considered the lowbrow provenance of the working class and the recently freed slave. Oration of dead languages that you could never pick up on the street, like those incomprehensible Latin or Greek texts only scholars could figure out, was considered the apogee of schooling in the brutal boarding schools of the elites that they forced their children to live in so they would lose touch with all emotional connection to the real world. It remains so today in the prep schools that rich kids go to before they enter Harvard or Yale. As an Arab American, I noticed that the Arabs do the same thing with classical Arabic, making children memorize the Quran without any understanding of its subtleties, historical context, or beauty or contradictions. The Quran actually forbids the use of music or imagery in its reading, so you will find no illustrated Qurans, even for children. And as my environmental rock band found out performing our song about water recycling in the IMAX theater of the Kuwait Science Center for middle school, one is also forbidden from accompanying any text with the holy of the holy book by music. Think about it. Thinking out loud about the more profound, esoteric, spiritual, religious, scientific, and technical issues, or about serious and important topics, is never supposed to be accompanied by any media that makes it easy, or makes it accessible, or makes it fun. As Hall & Oates sang, we're even supposed to see concentration lines on the face of serious music. The great astrophysicist, astronomer Carl Sagan, a professor at Cornell University, was terribly criticized for going on television and promoting popular science. His audio-visual approach to teaching serious science was considered heresy, and he risked losing his credibility and his job. Now you could say that part of the argument is true, that good science can suffer from popularization because anytime you interpret symbols to make them easier for those who haven't mastered an area of study, you inevitably introduce the biases of the artist doing the interpretation. Comic books, for example, do make it easier for readers to bypass the need for their own deep thinking about the text. The work is done for the reader. Even Classics Illustrated, which were supposed to be a bridge for kids because they took literature that kids were supposed to be familiar with and make kids want to read them because of the exciting, colorful graphics, were mere crutches and could distort our perception of history because the artist might get the imagery wrong. We know this to be true from illustrated Bibles. For example, we read that Christ was born in a manger where animals feed, and so every European children's Bible and the creches that churches and homes put up at Christmas depicts a wooden lean-to filled with straw. It was only when I actually went to Bethlehem and visited where Christ was born that I learned that in the Holy Land, a manger, the place where animals are fed, manger, is actually a cave, or is made out of stones. Wood is in short supply in desert regions. Christ's actual manger was in a cave underground, if they got the placement right, and can be visited at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You learn a couple things when you go there. One, Christ was not born around Christmas at the time of the winter solstice. He was born around the spring equinox, around March 20th, so scenes of him in the winter are wrong. And again, the image used by European artists biased the readers. And two, Christ was not blonde-haired, white-skinned, or blue-eyed. Again, these were artistic interpretations by Europeans. Christ was an Israelite, a Palestinian Jew, with dark skin and dark curly hair.